Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we're going to take a look at the upcoming lunar eclipse in the sign of Gemini. I'm doing this on Friday of this week because the eclipse comes on Monday. We're going to be Sunday night into Monday morning, and we're going to be taking a look at the horoscopes for the month of December early next week. So I wanted to give people a little bit of extra time to prepare for the eclipse and just sort of start meditating on where it might be landing in your chart, especially. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about the nature of a lunar eclipse, talk a little bit about what to expect based on the configuration of your chart according to your rising signs. We're going to do whole sign house, roll through the, we'll take the eclipse through the 12 houses and give you a sense of what to expect. So that's our agenda for today. Before I dive in, I want to remind all of you that I am in the midst of my 40 days of fundraising for the year ahead. If you enjoy this channel, if you get a lot out of it, if you share, if you like it, if the things that you learn on this channel stick with you, if I'm a reliable source of astrological insight in your day-to-day life, then I really appreciate your support. You can donate. We're trying to get to 691 backers to beat last year's record of 690. So just try to do a little bit better than we did the year before. There's a lot of rewards you can choose when you go to the Kickstarter page, which you can find in the comments section below this post. The great thing is that the best thing that I offer is 50% off all of my online courses in 2021. So if you've been thinking of taking one of my classes or even are enrolled in one or thinking about taking an advanced class, this would be a great way to save. All right, so thank you very much. Really appreciate your guys' support. Let's go ahead and dive in. So putting the real-time clock up, here we have, this is, about 3 in the morning or so in the Twin Cities where I'm located. Monday morning early, so Sunday night into Monday morning. Now, remember, eclipses don't play out right away. You're thinking about an eclipse as the indication of like, the fuse has been lit, but it's a long fuse. It can kind of take 3, 4, even sometimes up to 5 or 6 months because you're getting series of eclipses, not just one eclipse. So you're getting eclipses in Gemini and opposite sign Sagittarius since last June of 2020. Now again here in the fall going into winter of 2021 in the Northern Hemisphere. Then it's going to come back next spring in the Northern Hemisphere. We're going to get eclipses in the same 2 signs. That's a process-oriented interpretation, so that you have to give when you're looking at eclipses for that reason. Now, there's going to be openings and there's going to be closings. The opening eclipses, the ones that plant seeds and indicate significant new chapters in your life, are going to be those solar eclipses. We have one in December we're going to be talking about. Lunar eclipses, the full moon represents the blossoming or the completion, or you could say the promise, the manifestation of the promise that was made at the beginning of a cycle. Now, these cycles have lifespans that are very, very, very old, lifetimes long, but they also sometimes pertain to very immediate things that have been happening in our lives, say in the past 6 months or the past year, or even longer periods of time. If you track the cycles going back, roughly every 9 years, 18 years, you get eclipses in the same signs. So there's lots of different ways you can track out the narratives that are a part of these eclipses. The simplest way for a lot of people, that's going to be too complicated. So the simplest thing to do is to take a look at, do I have a new moon solar eclipse or a full moon lunar eclipse? And which sign and house is it falling in my birth chart? Is it falling near any natal planets? That can be really important. Is it conjoined to a natal planet, especially? So in this case, we have a full moon, the lunar eclipse, the promise of something from the past being made manifest, completing itself, resolution, finality. Sometimes the ending of things, the breaking off or falling apart of things, happen at the lunar eclipses. My first teacher described it as a door that's closing in your life, which could mean something that's ending sometimes abruptly or in a difficult fashion, in a difficult manner. But other times you're going to see it as a promise fulfilled, something that's been realized or achieved. So those are the kinds of various symbols, those are the various meanings that the symbol of an eclipse will usually have. Now, what we want to do is look at the eclipse and say, is it closely aspecting any other planets? And by that, I mean, traditional, it's what we call Ptolemaic aspects. And no, this eclipse is not falling, super close to any particular planets, not any traditional aspects anyway. So you don't have this moon plugged really tightly into a degree-based aspect with any other planet. It's about 12 degrees off from the north node, and the further it is away from the node when it perfects, I think it's reasonable to say that it's usually a little bit weaker. So this isn't like the world's strongest eclipse. The one that we're getting in mid-December in Sagittarius, that's a lot stronger. But this one is still important, and we need to take a look at it. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to run through the 12 signs. We're going to orient this through what are called whole sign houses. And we're going to, I recommend it to get the most out of the technique that I'm using today, to calculate your chart in whole sign houses. Now, that's the kind of original house system that ancient astrologers used. And it's part of the way that I teach and practice as a sort of call it a Hellenistic astrologer. And I've talked about that a lot, about what that is before in previous videos that I've done. But anyway, let's start. And what I'm going to do is just pull all of the planets, except for the moon and the sun, out of the chart, just so we can really focus and give you guys a view through all 12 whole sign houses. Now, when this eclipse you start with Aries rising. So your chart is going to be configured by whole sign in this exact same way if you use whole sign houses and you're an Aries rising. So this is the way to read this. And if you don't know, I like AstroSeek. I think that's a good one. Astro Gold is a pretty cheap program you can get. I have it on my phone. I have SolarFire if you use a PC. Time Passages is a good kind of a beginner's program for both. I think it's both Mac and PC, but at any rate, so if you're an Aries rising, this is falling in your third house. So you put these pieces together, and it's a general formula for success in terms of understanding it. You've got completion, culmination, resolution, potentially letting go around the topics of siblings, neighbors, neighborhood, immediate environment, short journeys or travel. See a lot of people, for example, that swap out cars, or that pay off a car, or that are no longer going to take the subway to work. They're going to bicycle. I mean, it could be something really simple like that, about something changing in your immediate environment, something changing about how you travel, something happening with siblings. I've seen siblings getting divorced, or siblings having a baby, some culminating moment of karma that's kind of like the grand finale of a fireworks display. It has a little bit of that feeling, and it could have something specifically to do with siblings. Okay, so the other thing that the third house can pertain to is going to be communication, technology, the mind, literally the way you think and relate to the world and thought. Sometimes the lunar eclipses in the third house can speak to mental or emotional challenges that a person is going through, maybe temporarily. And it can also speak to the desire to learn something, or getting really plugged into something that you're passionate about as say, a student, or teaching people other things, teaching people things that you're maybe passionate about. But there would be, behind it would be the feeling of something reaching its peak or culmination or completion. So that's if you're an Aries rising. Now let's move this forward to Taurus. If you're a Taurus rising, this is landing in your second house. So you're thinking about something coming to a natural state of completion and closure regarding money or finances, sales or transactions, agreements. Second house traditionally was also a place that belonged to helpers or counselors that somehow served or aided or assisted the native, the individual. For example, your personal attorney would be the second house. So resources that you have, or people that somehow help you, and things that are changing in that area of life, or possibly changes around money or finances, business and investments, a totally different approach to money or finances. For example, moving to the Twin Cities, we have to change our bank account. We're going to have to do that probably in the next month. There you go. So, it can be simple. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing in the world. It depends. Is it close to a natal planet in your chart? Is it very, very closely aspecting a planet in your chart? Conjoined is going to be the strongest one. But so you've got financial things happening, or perhaps things related to investments or business or resources that you have, buying or selling things, expenditures and income. Watch for those topics to be really important. Now let's go forward to Gemini rising. If you're a Gemini rising, this is very personal. This is a very personal moment where something is coming to a state of completion or closure in your personal life. I've seen people have surgeries or deal with some kind of sickness that pushes them to completely change their lifestyle. I'm going to quit smoking now, for example, or I'm going to start eating different, or because I had some kind of scare. That would be like the scariest level of it. But also just a sense that I'm done with something now. That's over, and now I'm starting to think about what's next. It's that sense of having personally realized or completed something, perhaps something related to health, perhaps something, sometimes for the first house, when the moon eclipses in that sign, it's also about home, family, and how those things are related to your identity or your mental or emotional health. So that's a few things to watch for if you're a Gemini rising. All right, let's run it forward to Cancer rising. If you're a Cancer rising, the moon's in your 12th house. So this is a more difficult placement for an eclipse to happen. You're thinking about things that are coming to completion. There's resolution or closure, a door that's closing after it has a history behind it, and it's in a house that can often have to do with self-undoing, sickness, difficulties, loss, sometimes a state of confusion, or kind of distancing oneself from the world somehow, perhaps for spiritual or creative reasons as well. But there's something a little otherworldly about this one, and it could be a little bit more on the difficult or emotional side. Another thing too that I would suggest that you have to think about health in the family. If you're a Cancer rising, you're really dialed into the moon. So this could also be about your, this is your ascendant ruler, right? So your health, your body, your mother, your family, children, and could it be that there is a milestone that's being reached somewhere that's a little bit painful or bittersweet, but for example, I've even seen like kids going off to school for the first time. We're in the middle of, winter, but at least here in the Northern Hemisphere, but it's not like a time where kids would be starting school, but you could almost imagine like it's bittersweet. I have to say my kid is leaving the house, or something like that. Sometimes there's just a sense of, or I'm retiring and I don't know what to do with myself now. So that 12th house space is interesting because sometimes it's going to be more on the, like, the more painful, heavy side of things that are completing or culminating that are more difficult and weighty. Remember, the 12th house is called the joy of Saturn. But it's also potential for there to be some, I use this word a lot, but like a liminal space where you're confused. Where am I now? What comes next? This thing has just completed, almost like postpartum depression after birthing something. So watch for those kinds of energies. I'd love to hear from my Cancer rising people about this eclipse over the next weeks and just how you're dealing with it and what you notice, because I think it's one of the more interesting and compelling signatures since it's your ruling planet. And whenever eclipses come for Cancers, I just noticed that it can be really impactful. So let's run it forward to Leo. If we're talking about Leo rising, then we're putting the moon in the 11th house. Now that's going to be the place of friends, groups, allies, benefactors, wishes, hopes, and aspirations. The 11th house is called the joy of Jupiter, and it's a pretty uplifting house, but a lunar eclipse in this house can mean the end of certain friendships or some kind of culminating or completion milestone or marker in a group or an organization, internal changes in organizations that may not be entirely easy, but also the sense of completing something as a part of a team, or sometimes losing interest in something that had been a preoccupation or ambition of yours for a long time. But watch especially for social dynamics and changes among friends and colleagues, sometimes with the sense that an expiration date has been reached. Now, let's run it forward to Virgo. Virgo in the first house. Some of these are simpler to explain than others because some houses are just a little bit more straightforward. Others are a little trickier to, expound upon. But the 10th house transit, if you're a Virgo rising, the lunar eclipse is going to fall into the 10th house, which is a place of work. It's also a place of vocation, public reputation, your relationship with the world that you live in outside the doors of your own home, so to speak. This can mean that that you're reaching a place of maturation, completion, even success in the workplace. But frankly, it can also mean that you're losing a job or changing jobs, or that the management is changing, or that something is reaching a state of completion. It's not necessarily easy. It's a foreshadowing that there's going to be deeper, longer term process of change happening in the workplace, and say the next 6 months or so. So that's something to watch for if you're a Virgo rising. I also like the idea of lunar eclipses in the 10th house can change the public face or appearance of something in your life. And that can be something to watch for as well, since it's a very public place. All right, let's go forward to Libra rising. We're putting the lunar eclipse in Gemini in your 9th house, which is the place of the higher mind, learning, universities, religion, travel to foreign places. It's a place related to the law and legal system. So, if you're a Libra who's going through any kind of legal conflict, this might be a signal that's coming to a close. Could be a sign that you're deciding you don't want to go to school anymore, that you're going to change schools, or that you're reaching the end of a program or a training and that you're going to get your certificate. So you think of culminating or completing moments, a teacher dying or passing away, or a mentor no longer being part of your life, or finishing some kind of mentorship process or apprenticeship. You also think about the handing of the baton from teacher to student in a kind of generational turnover of wisdom and ideas. This is also a transit that has to do with a change in our faith and our beliefs and our ideas, a kind of a paradigm change that's happening right now for you. And it could take a little bit to realize what that means or to fully understand the ramifications of it. Let's put Scorpio on the ascendant. Put Scorpio on the ascendant. We're plugging the moon into the 8th house. This is such a mysterious house. There's so much here that has to do with karmic weights that we are either in the process of shedding or accruing. Karmic weights or debts that we owe other people that are getting paid off, or that people owe us something and it's coming to us somehow, or that we are accruing different kinds of debts or potentially future penalties or entanglements. So it's a house where it's not really a bad house, but it's definitely not a good house, right? Because there's always this kind of energy of potential future entanglement and consequence that comes with the 8th. The other thing, though, is that when debts are lifted, it can be so deeply transformational, sometimes a little traumatic as well. That's why the house is related to death as well as the fear of the future. So watch for deeper burdens to be lifted, or sometimes, especially with a Mercury ruled sign for a Scorpio, the truth to come out somehow and to clear or level the playing field. Scorpios, I'm interested in your experience of this one too. I always find lunar eclipses in the 8th house to be rather mysterious and difficult to describe, or difficult to predict, I should say. So I'd love to hear some of your stories about how that goes over the next weeks and months. Moving along, we have Sagittarius rising. This puts the lunar eclipse into your 7th house of marriage and relationships. Now, this is in a broader sense, the 7th house can relate to your social dynamics in your life in a general sense. So there might be something changing in terms of your relationship with the world and how you identify in the world as a social animal, so to speak. But there's also the obvious potential for major changes in partnerships, romantic life, sexuality, things pertaining to those topics, or possibly the life or the events that are really important that are happening in a spouse or partner's life. They don't necessarily even have to involve you. So watch for that sense of culmination and completion there in the house of relationships if you're a Sag rising. This is a big part, but by the way, for Sag risings, it's a pretty big deal because you're going to get the solar eclipse following this in December, which means whatever is culminating in relationships is leading to a kind of personal rebirth for you later in December. All right. Now we are moving next into Capricorn rising, which places the moon lunar eclipse in the sixth house. This can be really rough for health, to be totally frank. The health of partners, mothers, the health of family members or other people in your life. I say that because if you're a Capricorn rising, the moon rules your seventh house. And that's another placement that I've noticed over time is very vulnerable when it comes to lunar eclipses. But not typically in your life as a Capricorn, more so in the life of somebody that you know, or someone in your family, or a spouse's family member, or kind of the family tree. So watch for potentially something kind of coming to a head around challenges or difficulties with family members, spouse, children, things like that. It doesn't have to be devastating or anything, but just maybe a little bit of stress or tension around that. On the other hand, if you've been working and working and working, typical sixth house activity, a lot of sacrifice, blood, sweat, and tears that's going into something, you might be reaching a natural state of completion or culminating in some form of recognition or advancement that you've been building toward over a very long period of time. Sixth house is a house that, like an Olympic athlete, the payoff is huge, but the amount of work and discipline and training that comes first is, it in some ways it far outweighs the tiny sliver of time where you're standing on the top step of and holding the Olympic gold. So the sixth house culminating eclipse can be good in terms of finishing something that there's been a lot of toil and you've given a lot of yourself to, and that might be a good thing. Otherwise, eclipses in the sixth house sometimes bring that element of misfortune or just having to grind your way through something. That's a possibility to keep open to, but don't worry, it won't last forever. When you have eclipses in your sixth and the 12th, it's kind of like a temporary zone of working through challenging things and finding your way back into a place where you feel centered. Again, all of the cadent houses were thought of as worlds between worlds. So there's a sense of things not being totally resolved and this kind of dealing with things perpetually as you have eclipses in the 6th or 12th houses. But the good news is that a lunar eclipse does tend to bring things to a state of culmination. Now, if you're an Aquarius rising, we're going to place the lunar eclipse in your 5th house, which is called the joy of Venus in the house of good fortune. Lunar eclipses in this house will often bring about the end of some kind of tryst or romantic affair. Sometimes they bring children or pregnancy. Sometimes they will bring the birth of a child, or sometimes they will bring the end of something that has been frivolous or reckless or hedonistic. On the other hand, the lunar eclipse in this house can also signal things that are happening, again, like say relative to the topic of friends, air sign, Gemini in the 5th, friends and their children, or family members and children, kind of that moon 5th house combination in Gemini, where you get this kind of brothers, sisters, friends, people who are really like folk to you. And the topic of children and pregnancy can somehow come in this really strong way. I've seen so many examples of this over time that are they're so ordinary, but it's amazing how accurate this will be. My best friend had a baby, or my sister's having a kid, or whatever the case might be. Or I've been having this love affair for a long time. Lunar eclipse in the 5th house, it's over. I've been spending too much money. I maxed out a credit card and I realized I have to stop. Sometimes it's the fun is over, or it's also a signal of some major life change related to these other topics like children, family, and kids. Now, the 5th house, also a place of creativity, could represent the culmination of some kind of creative endeavor, which might be a good sign if you've been working on something. This is a sign that maybe in the not too distant future you'll be ready to complete something. All right. Last but not least, we put Pisces on the ascendant. You're looking at the lunar eclipse in the 4th house of home and family. And this is, pretty basic. You're looking at culmination, completion, resolution with anything to do with ancestry, with home, with land, with family, with property, with the basic resources that sort of prop you up and give you a foundational sense of safety or groundedness in the world. Also, potential here to see grandparents pass away or generational turnover somehow. And I'm not trying to scare anyone. It's not like it would be, like something completely out of the blue. Usually it's like, well, my 95-year-old, grandpa passed or something like that. But if there were to be anything like that at all, The other thing is that the lunar eclipse in the fourth house can sometimes signal that something that has been hidden or secretive is somehow coming to the surface, which is kind of weird because typically you wouldn't think of a lunar eclipse in the fourth house in relation to something being revealed. But the fourth house was a place of hidden things. It was related to the occult and to the study of sacred mysteries in the ancient world. When the moon is eclipsed in this house, there's a funny way in which the alternation of light and dark with the moon in this subterranean place will sometimes speak to things hidden and things revealed. Like I've seen people get lunar eclipses in the fourth house and find out who my father was or contact their birth parents or something like that. So watch for those things if you're a Pisces rising. Also, anything to do with home or family in a general sense being more, you know, more of a focus for you, not only now, but over the next 6 months, as the eclipses will also come through in Gemini and Sagittarius again next spring. So that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope that this was useful. Let me just say like one or two things about, let me push this forward again. Sorry. About Gemini. The other thing to remember about this is that, you know, the eclipse is going to be rooted in what's happening with Mercury. Now, on what we're getting a Mercury that's in Scorpio as the eclipse is taking place. That means that the moon can't see its host, is in an aversion with its host. And then Mercury's entering into Sagittarius, where it immediately will make a bunch of antishas. Now, I talked about this a few times this week. This means that to me, this is just yet another indicator that the potential for hidden plots or information that we don't see and then later have to see and deal with is going to be a part of this month. Because water signs were called mute in the ancient world, which means they had a tendency towards secretiveness. Scorpio, the sign of Mars, tends to be a little cloak and dagger. You've got the moon in Mercury's sign eclipsing with that Mercury under, sort of under the beams, invisible, and then in Scorpio, then going into these antishas when it enters Sagittarius. So, I get the feeling that this eclipse may also, in a general sense, carry the signification of a process of information coming to light that blossoms and has this profound transformative effect. Sort of like, and this is kind of a heavier example, but sort of like you've been talking smack about someone for a really long time, and then suddenly you realize that they find out about it, and then you have to confront them. You have to deal with what you've said. You have to kind of deal with the ramifications of the consequences of your actions, which have been sort of hidden or secretive, and that causes a big shift, right? And so there could be something like that riding under the surface of this full moon, in particular, of this lunar eclipse. All right, so that's what I have for you guys today. Please feel free to share your stories and reflections and thoughts on the transits and on this particular eclipse. I'd really love to hear from you guys. Also, don't forget that my Kickstarter is going through the end of the year. If you haven't already, would love your support. If you like this channel, your support helps me do a ton of things, and you can pick a cool reward like discounted tuition to one of my programs, reward readings, exclusive lectures that I don't publish anywhere else. So by the way, we will, like I said, next week we'll have horoscopes coming out. We're going to be doing a series on Jupiter and Saturn entering Aquarius together. So lots of good stuff to come in the next couple of weeks. All right, that's what I've got for you guys. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.